Hi, Mac here, and if you want to know everything about growing tomatoes from seeds, this is the video for you. I'm going to cover how to decide which tomatoes you want to grow, how to decide which plants to plant, and then show you and demonstrate how to put those plants into a growing container to get you started well on your way to having tomatoes this year. So you want to grow tomatoes. Have you made up your mind about what type of tomato you want to grow? This one is an heirloom tomato, a beautiful pink color. Here we have a nice purple tomato, another heirloom variety, and there are so many wonderful types of tomatoes available to choose from. This one is green. Even when ripe, it still has a green overtone to it. And here's a really nice little yellow tomato. So these are heirloom tomatoes. These are great for slicing for sandwiches, to put on a burger. You decide what you want to do with that tomato. Or are you looking for something that you may want to sauce? This is a Roma tomato. Now these are really great for sauces, and they're really great for pasting as well. So do you want a Roma tomato? Do you want an heirloom tomato? Are you looking for something to go into a salad? If you're looking for a salad tomato, then you definitely want to pick up cherry tomatoes. This is a beautiful red cherry tomato, and here's a nice yellow orangish type cherry tomato. They come in wonderful colors, shapes, and sizes. The first thing you need to decide is which type of tomato you want to grow. Go to your shopping center, take a look around. Which type of tomatoes have you liked in the past? And I think that's what you should grow. Or if you just want something that's really attractive, you can also grow that. This purple tomato really stands out to me. I don't see purple tomatoes very often. And of course, I would love to grow this tomato. Your next consideration when selecting your tomatoes is to decide whether you want determinate or indeterminate. Indeterminate plants tend to be more vining style, and they produce fruit over a long growing season, whereas determinate plants tend to have more of a bush type habit, don't grow as viney, but they produce almost all their fruit over a very short time span. So you can decide if you want all your fruit ripe at once, which may be really great if you want a saucing tomato like a Roma tomato. You may want a Roma tomato to produce all of the fruit at one time so you can sauce it, can it, and it will be available for you. Or if you want to produce slicing tomatoes that you can cut over the long course of the summer season, then you want to get an indeterminate tomato. The great thing is that all tomato packets, seed packets, you go into your shopping center, garden center, and you're picking out your tomato seeds. All of the packets are going to have on the back a descriptor. And in that description, it's going to tell you whether that is a determinate or an indeterminate tomato plant. Again, determinate, bush type habit, all the fruit will ripen at almost the exact same time. Indeterminate, more of a vining style, and all those fruit will ripen over the longer course of a growing season. The back of the seed packet gives you a lot of information about your tomato plant. The back of the tomato seed packet gives you a lot of great information about the plant. It's going to tell you the height of the plant. Here in the UK, it's listed in meters. This particular tomato is going to be about 1.8 meters tall. It tells you the depth in which to plant the plant into the ground. It also tells you whether it's an indeterminate or a determinate plant, and it gives you other details about when to sow the plant, meaning if you're going to sow it indoors or if you're going to sow it outdoors directly. You get all of that information and so much more on the back of the seed packet. And that's where you really want to start. After you make that determination of this is the tomato that I want to grow, you flip it over and take a look at the back and start to get the details that you need to grow wonderful, healthy tomatoes. There's one key point I want to make about tomatoes right now. And whether you pick an indeterminate or determinate tomato plant, be prepared for an abundance of fruit. Tomato plants are prolific producers. Of course, when you have the tomato plants that are producing the larger, heavier tomatoes, such as this slicing tomato, this heirloom tomato, this plant is going to produce less tomatoes, and it may need to be staked or trellised to make sure that this doesn't break the plant, because it'll produce a lot of these large fruit right next to each other. So you want to make sure you're watching that and making sure that the plant isn't breaking down from the weight of the tomatoes. However, these smaller cherry tomatoes can also become pretty heavy. That plants may also need staking to ensure that the plant doesn't fall over from the weight of all the tomatoes. But be prepared. Whether you're growing a large tomato or growing cherry tomatoes, you're going to have a lot of tomatoes to deal with across the course of the summer. For those plants that are producing those larger tomatoes, they can easily produce up to 20 or slightly more tomatoes on one plant. And for plants such as those cherry tomatoes, well, they can produce well over 100 tomatoes on one plant. The next thing to do is to select your seed trays. Now, you can use a tray that is open and you just plant the seeds in spaces, but I always use seed trays with cells. However, This seed tray with these smaller cells is not what I would select for a tomato plant. There are other plants that I would put in this, such as marigolds, but I would not put a tomato plant in a seed tray with the smaller cells. I would go for a seed tray with larger cells because of how the tomato plant grows. One plant or one seed per cell. So this is what I would use, or I would use even larger seed tray cells such as this. Both I think are really great options. Now, if you don't want to go into seed tray cells, you can also go directly into small pots. Here we have a tomato. This is a beefsteak tomato, and you can plant one seed into a small pot like this. But think this is roughly the size of dirt that you'd want around that tomato seed. Because of how tomatoes grow, you want to give it a little bit more space. Those smaller cells may be a little bit constricting. You want to give it a bit more space because you don't want to have to try to repot that plant until you're ready to plant it outside. This is a great size for a small pot for a tomato. Again, beefsteak, which is going to be one of those really large slicing tomatoes. One of the best. Great beefsteak tomato here. So let's get started and showing you and demonstrating planting those tomato seeds into these individual cells. Of course, there's also the much larger seed tray cells. And so if you wanted to use this, you can use this as well. There are 18 in here. This is a really nice size seed tray cell, but I wouldn't go any larger than this. This is about as large as I would go for the seed tray cells. If you can understand, this is roughly the same size. You can see that I can plop that right in there. So it's a little bit bigger, but it gives you that right amount of space for growing your tomato seedlings. This is about as large as you'd want to go. And I think personally, this is about as small as you'd want to go. This is a nice size seed tray cell. They're available at your garden center, but don't get those really tiny cells. It may be constricting for the tomato plant. So I like to grow a lot of tomatoes, and I like to grow a lot of different varieties. I'll go through the varieties that I'm going to plant here. I already have these two young tomato plants here, and these are both beefsteak, both going to be indeterminate. Again, growing those really nice, big, beefy tomatoes. And here is red currant. And these are going to be the tomatoes. They're roughly the size of grapes, really small tomatoes. I have red currant. I grew this last year. It's a great tomato, really small, great for salads. Right alongside that, there is yellow currant. Also, same size. One is just red and the other is yellow. Here is a determinate tomato that we're going to grow. And this is Cherry Falls. This is a bush type plant. A determinate tomato. Again, most of those fruit will get ripe over a shorter time span, and it's a really great tomato. I'm not going to plant as many of those. And this is palmetto, which is plummetto, which is a indeterminate Roma style tomato, and that's going to be a really nice tomato to grow. Cherry Million, another cherry tomato, really small, a nice cherry tomato. This is great for salads. Another indeterminate variety. Moneymaker, classic slicing tomato, indeterminate variety. Most of them are going to be indeterminate. And here is Super Sauce F1. Now, if you want to do a sauce, Super Sauce is definitely the way to go. More of a Roma style tomato, indeterminate plant. I'm going to plant 2 seeds of each one of these. And this is Agro F1, another saucing tomato. And this is great for sauce as well. So here I have my growing tray. I have my tray, and I'm going to do 1 seed per cell. That's how I like to do it. 1 seed per cell. You could do 2 seeds per cell and then select the plant that is growing the best. And so we have a lot of seeds available. We may do 2 seeds per cell. And then if one is growing better than the other, we snip one of them off and then grow on this second one. The reason you would do that is to make sure that you have germination. You don't want to go through all this trouble and you don't get good germination. But all of these seeds, except for these, red currant and yellow currant, these were purchased last year, and seeds can last over several years. These were purchased last year, not as new, but these other were all purchased from the garden center this year. 2 seeds per cell, and in almost all cases, you're going to plant that seed roughly 1 inch to 2 inches down into the soil. So let's go ahead and get started planting these up. And we're going to start out with the ones that's already open. I'll start with here, yellow currant. Now, a lot of tomatoes have really small seeds. You have to be aware of that. There's a handful of seeds, and I hope you can see that, but they're really small seeds. I only need 2 of these. I'm going to separate these out and put 1 here and put 1 here, and just kind of press that in, press that down about 1 inch, a little more, and then kind of pat that soil down around it. And put these seeds here back into the container. And the reason I'm just doing a couple seeds from each plant is to give me a wide variety of seeds to grow over the course of the season, and to just make sure that I don't end up with too many tomato plants. Now, I can tell you from experience, red currant and yellow currant produce a large amount of produce over the course of the year. Indeterminate plants, they just keep growing. They grow long, well over a meter, so you have to stake them. I use tomato cages, and when I'm not using a cage, I will individually stake the plants to make sure that the plants, and then I just fold that over, and I have a nice dry place where I keep these seeds, and I think these will be good for me at least for another year or two. One here, press that in, press that in. So I wanted to do two, so I have one red here, one yellow here. I want to go over and do another yellow currant, and then another red currant. So I wanted to do 2 cells per each seed type. And because of the fruit for red currant and yellow currant tomatoes is so small, the seeds, again, are exceptionally small seeds. But they're really tasty little tomatoes. They work really great in salads. That's how I used them and enjoyed them last year. You can eat a salad, or you could just eat the tomato by itself. And in both cases, I think you would enjoy what you get out of it. Now, because I know that I'm going to plant all of these tomatoes together in a couple of growing pots, I'm not worried so much about labeling which plant is which. But if you want to do that, you can definitely label which plant you have growing in which conditions and in which cell. And so you want to put a stake in and label if you want to keep up with it. For me, it doesn't matter because I know I'm going to plant all of these together and I'm not really concerned. So red currant, yellow currant. And they're just going to continue to go down the line, open up each seed packet, take 2 seeds out, plant in each cell, 2 seeds per cell, 2 cells per seed type. And this is something that you run into. So you have this larger packet here, and inside of it, there is a smaller sealed packet. Kind of dump it like that because you want to get all these seeds to fall down below the tear line. And you just kind of tear across the top. You may have to tear that all the way across to make sure you can get that all the way open. And then you just kind of open it up. And roughly, typically, you get at least 20 seeds here. I don't get as many here. This looks like about 10 seeds in this one. These seeds are a little larger, more along the line of what you normally see from a tomato seed. So this cell is planted, this one is planted, this one here. And I'm just going to do 2 and 2. And the seeds that I don't use, put back inside the container. And this is a tomato Agro F1 Roma style tomato. So that's planted. The red currants are planted. Let's move on now to Super Sauce, which is another phenomenal Roma style tomato. I've grown this one before, and I use it when I'm doing, when I want to make sauce, when I'm canning tomatoes, which happens, of course, at the latter part of this season. If you want to can tomatoes, there's a lot of great videos and details to really talk to you about how to do that. Again, smaller packet inside of the larger packet here. Just make sure all those seeds are down towards the end. Two came out of my hand, one here, and just need 2 more. There we go. About 1 inch in. And once I get all of these seeds that I want in place, I'm going to water 2 different ways. One, I'll show you when I water from the top, where I just mist across the top to get the top damp. And then I will water into the tray and let the water soak up into, and this is tomato moneymaker. Beefsteak is one of my favorite tomatoes. And I think that, you know, if you're going to grow tomatoes, there's always that option to grow an heirloom tomato. And I may go back and find some seeds, if I can, of, say, a purple tomato or a nice pink tomato. a striped tomato, a nice heirloom tomato, I think would go really well just to round out what I have here. I have a lot of different cherry tomato types. I have a few Roma tomato types, mostly indeterminate again, but it would be nice if I had a nice heirloom tomato. Those heirloom tomato seeds, you kind of want to get those and grow them just to kind of keep those varieties alive. You know, if people don't buy those seeds, the growers may not to continue to produce them. But we want a wide variety of seeds available for now and in the future. And you can also save your own tomato seeds. I'll cover that in a separate video in the future. So be sure to like and subscribe to this channel so you can follow along through the garden season, growing season. All right, we have a few more varieties here. So we planted out all the way across. And what we have next is Sweet Million. This is another cherry tomato, indeterminate. Again, before you rip that packet open, read the back, see all the information about planting depth and how far to separate those plants when you put them out and you plant them into your garden and your pots. Now, all of mine are going to go into pots. I don't plant directly, not my tomatoes. I don't plant them directly into the ground. I love to be able to control the growing conditions a little bit more, and I can do that in really large pots. Now, these, again, cherry tomatoes have incredibly small seeds. Wow, these seeds are very, very small seed there. And if you want to save seeds from year over year, again, put them back in the packet, fold that packet over, keep it in a nice dry place with a moderate temperature. You don't want it to be able to get too hot, and you definitely need them to stay dry. And so what I do, I put that packet back in here, and then I just tend to just fold everything over just like that. And then I put that back up with my other seeds. I have two more varieties. A nice Roma type variety. This is going to be really great. I'm going to have a lot of tomatoes here this year, and I'm excited about it because we use a lot of tomatoes. And you can always can your tomatoes and produce sauces as well. Producing your own tomato sauce is a wonderful experience. Here you can see in this packet, it's a little different. You can kind of see through it to see the seeds there. And you can tell that there's roughly 20 seeds. So I'm not going to use all of these. I like this packet, this style. I don't have to tear anything, just kind of unfold that. There we go. Just move one of these over. There we go. Just kind of 1 and 2. A little bit extra there. One here, one here. Again, about 1 inch down, a little over 1 inch. Press down. And then we have one last seed to plant. I have one cell for it, but I will still put two seeds in that last cell. And that is a Determinate variety, which is Cherry Falls, another wonderful cherry tomato. This is Cherry Falls. This will be the last one that I plant in this tray. And this will produce potentially, if considering red currants, will have well over 100 seeds. So 1, 2, 3, 4, that could be 400 right there. 400 tomato over the growing season, 400 tomatoes, cherry tomatoes. I planted 2 cells of the millions, Sweet Million. That could be another potential 200. So 600 tomatoes, and then the beefsteak may produce 20. So we're looking at into the hundreds of tomatoes just out of this one tray and these 2 small tomato plants here. So you have to be considerate of the amount of space that you have available and the amount of time that you have to dedicate towards harvesting all of your tomatoes. And it's a wonderful position to be in, to have a lot of tomatoes and then have friends to share those with. I would commonly take tomatoes to work, share them with friends, family, coworkers. It's a wonderful opportunity if you're around a lot of people who may not grow tomatoes, fresh tomatoes, homegrown. Absolutely something wonderful to have. Again, cherry tomatoes, very small seeds. There we go. So all of my seeds are now planted. I'm going to mist this and then add water to the bottom of the tray. And let's move on to that next step. Let's go to the misting. I like to mist across the top. I feel like it helps to set everything in place. One of the things you definitely don't want to do is get your water pitcher and pour it across the top. Those seeds, and the soil is dry, those seeds are dry, and you can easily wash everything up out of the individual cells, and everything gets mixed up really bad. So I missed it to kind of set it in place. I'm not trying to necessarily water everything down from the top. Again, I like to let the water rise up from the bottom. Just get that misted in place there. There we go. A little more. Okay, so that's all of my misting. And then what I'll do is, this tray is inside of this larger solid tray here. And I'll just add water. About enough water to equal about an inch or an inch and a half. It's going to soak up into the soil, and it's going to get those seeds wet, and they'll start the germination process. Some people do soak their tomato seeds before they plant them. I don't tend to. I come right out of the packet, right into the soil, and I've never had a problem with growing them that way. Now, you have to be careful, because if you have these seed trays and you buy them, especially the ones with the smaller cells, this could be a little flimsy. So if you get water in there, and it could be a little flimsy. So you have to be careful and make sure that you're not doing that. The tray that I purchased here is a heavier tray, so I'm not concerned about it being flimsy or having any problem with having that water in there. What I'm going to do next is put a top over this to increase the humidity, which will help with the germination. So if it was colder here, then I would set this on a nice heating pad. But for now, I'll just place this on the top. It doesn't have to, be airtight, so to speak, but it's there, it's covers. And this I will now place in a nice warm windowsill. The daytime temperature is roughly about 60 degrees. I'll keep a close eye on it. There's plenty of water in here. This will go into a windowsill now, and I'll wait on germination, which should happen over the next week to a week and a half. If you're interested in growing your tomatoes in pots, I have mine in really large grow pots that are about 2 feet long and about 2 feet deep. So they're really large growing pots. But you could grow a tomato in a pot roughly this size, which this is a good 12 inches. So you could take one plant, sit it here, and if you were more adventurous, you maybe could get squeezed in 2, but you definitely wouldn't want to put more than 2 in a pot this size. You want to make sure that plant has plenty of room and space. And I think 2 may be a little crowded, but it could possibly work. I probably would just go 12-inch pot, roughly 1 plant, to make sure it has a nice growth space. And that's something you could do as well. This is a nice size pot, about this size if you want to go with 1 tomato plant. If you want more than 1 tomato plant in your pot, then I would go a little larger on that pot to make sure that the plants have a lot of room to grow. There are a lot of metal growing cages that you could purchase. You could buy them online or in your garden center. I actually tend to use a lot of canes. So if you're having, say, this is a determinate bush growing type tomato, which it's not, but let's just assume that it is, you could plant it here, put those stakes in around that plant, and you can see here it's going to be dependent on the height of the plant. A determinate plant may not get as tall, and this size staking may actually work for it. You can use string in between as the plant grows up. You can string in between it and weave that plant up and through there, and that would provide support for that plant over the growing season. What you could also do, and what I did last year, was use a lot of these longer stakes. I had a lot of indeterminate plants, and even the growing cages weren't tall enough. So with that, I had a lot of these stakes, and I would create a bit of a web, say 3 or 4 around a plant, and then I would use string as well again to tie everything together to create a nice web in which to grow the plant. You could use here, this is a plastic one, and these, which are shorter, were kind of a canes. And those all worked really well for me last year with growing tomatoes. I've grown other tomatoes inside of cages as well. The key thing about cages is that you have to get the cage in place before the plant gets large. It's really hard to kind of come back later and try to put that cage in place. So if you're going to plant this outside in the ground or in a larger growing area, and you know you want to cage it, shortly after getting this plant into the ground, go ahead, get that cage around it so as the plant grows, it's already in the midst of the cage. I find that if you don't put that cage around the plant earlier, it's a lot easier to go in and insert these stakes later in the growing season as the plant's gotten large. If you don't put a cage around it, these stakes work really well. Again, you could put one right next to the main central growing vine of the plant, or if you want to put several and use string to kind of create a web, that is up to you depending on how your plant is growing and the amount of space that you have. After your last frost date and you're ready to plant this outside, a good way to do it is to harden this plant off. This plant has been grown indoors or inside of a greenhouse. It's in wonderful, well cared for conditions, no wind, none of those things are bothering the plant. So you want to harden the plant off. What I tend to do is in the morning, I'll take this plant and sit it in a shaded area outside. This will allow wind to blow past the plant, allow that stem to stiffen up, and it can start to adjust to those conditions. Every day, I'll push it a little closer to the sun out of the shaded area. And over the course of, say, a week or a little longer, the plant will harden off. In the evening, I'm bringing the plant back indoors. So outside during the day, inside in the evening. And that's how I harden the plant off. And then I plant it outside. When I plant the plant outside, it's going into a pot. Again, I'm planting only in pots with well composted soil and mixed in with a nice 3 to 6 month fertilizer. I like a 3 to 6 month fertilizer, slow release. That way you're not having to add a lot of fertilizer repeatedly over the course of the season. You can use a liquid fertilizer if you like. That's not a slow release, but you have to be careful not to put too much fertilizer on your plants because that can stunt the plant growth or even burn the plants. Those leaves will turn brown and start to curl up. So don't over fertilize. You also want to make sure that your plants are well drained, where you have holes in the bottom so those plants are not sitting there holding water. Tomato plants that sit in a pot that holds a lot of water can cause root rot, and that will kill your plant. It also will cause that fertilizer to release too much of the nutrient. If they're just sitting in water, too much nutrients released too fast, that can also put too much fertilizer in the soil, and that can kill the plant as well. I like to use a slow release fertilizer that has, of course, the potassium, nitrogen, and phosphorus, but also has other trace elements. This one in particular has boron, copper, magnesium, zinc. It sounds almost like a multivitamin, but that's things, those micronutrients, the plants need that to grow just as much as they need those macronutrients. One of the main problems I've noted with tomatoes is blossom end rot. And that is when you have a beautiful tomato, but on that end where the blossom was, it's brown, it's mushy, it's leathery, and it really makes you just want to throw the whole tomato out. The main cause of that is going to be a lack of calcium in your soil. Also, infrequent watering and potentially not enough balanced fertilizer. So you want to make sure you use a balanced fertilizer. You may want to add calcium, calcium supplement to your soil. Watch out for a lot of fertilizers that say they specialize in tomato plants. Read that back to see if calcium is included, and a lot of them calcium is not included. It's balanced, but you could be using a tomato specific fertilizer and still have a calcium deficiency in your soil. Tomatoes also like to grow in soil that's about 6.5 pH, so you want to test the soil pH, make sure that's in the right range. All of those things can lead to blossom end rot and other problems, having mushy tomatoes. So you want to make sure you have the right fertilizer, watering on a frequent basis, adding in that calcium supplement. You have to do it really early in the season. Once you have a problem where a tomato is already grown, you can add the calcium, but the uptake may not be quick enough to stop the blossom end rot from happening to your plants. So these are the steps that you need to get you started down the path towards a bountiful harvest later in the season. Hey, if you have any questions, drop that down in the comments and I'll respond as soon as I can. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. I love to talk about plants, indoors and outdoors, vegetables and ornamentals. I'm into all of it, and I love to share the knowledge that I have with you. Until next time, take care.